had the most peaceful morning of my life on a Tuesday, when my 4 children told me I was already dead to them. It was February 14th, 2024, Valentine's Day. I remember that detail because I'd actually set out chocolates on the coffee table, the good kind from that Belgian place in downtown Bozeman that I only bought for special occasions. I thought maybe we'd have one of those afternoons where everyone actually listens to each other, where the noise and hurry of their lives stops for a minute. I was 76 years old, and I'd learned to appreciate the small moments. But the moment I saw the way they filed into my living room, Garrett first, then Melissa, followed by the twins Cameron and Natalie, I knew something was different. My youngest, Natalie, she wouldn't even make eye contact. Garrett, my oldest, he had a manila folder in his hands. Not a valentine, a folder. I didn't say anything. I never did. That was always my way. My name is Eleanor Catherine Price, and for 52 years I lived in the same house on Bridger Meadow Lane in Bozeman, Montana. The house was a 1974 Craftsman with a wraparound porch that my late husband Richard and I renovated ourselves over the course of 15 years. He died in 2011. I've been alone ever since, but the house has never felt empty. Not until that day. The house appraised at $890,000 just 6 months earlier. I didn't ask for the appraisal. Melissa, my second child, had arranged it. "For estate planning purposes, Mom," she'd said. I should have known right then. But let me back up. Let me tell you who these 4 people were, because that matters. That's the whole story, really, who they were and what I gave up for them. Garrett Edmund Price was born in 1987 when I was 31 years old and thought I knew everything about motherhood. I didn't. He was a difficult baby, reflux so severe that some nights he'd scream for 6 hours straight. Richard would hold him while I'd shower just to get the smell of vomit out of my hair, and then I'd take over so Richard could sleep before work. Garrett needed special formula that was wildly expensive in those days. We're talking $150 a month when I was making $28,000 a year as a paralegal. That was 20% of my take-home pay. When Garrett was 4, he was diagnosed with a speech impediment. We spent $4,000 on a speech therapist, money we didn't have. I took a night job at a hotel front desk for 2 years just to cover those sessions. I'd work days at the law firm, come home, give him dinner, send Richard the bedtime routine, and then drive to the hotel at 9 p.m. I'd be home by 6 a.m. to get him ready for preschool. I did that for 2 years. 2 years of sleeping 4 hours a night. Garrett is a dentist now in Missoula. He makes $320,000 a year. He has never, in his entire adult life, once thanked me for those years. Not once. Then there was Melissa Diane. She was born in 1989, 3 weeks early, and spent her first 2 weeks in NICU. I was allowed to hold her twice in those 14 days. When they finally let us bring her home, I had postpartum depression so severe I couldn't look at my own infant without feeling like I was drowning. I went to therapy, uninsured, paying out of pocket, for 18 months. During that time I had no money for myself, nothing. I wore the same 3 outfits, cut my own hair. When Melissa was 7, she developed severe anxiety. She couldn't be in school. She'd have panic attacks. We put her in private school for 3 years, paying $12,000 a year out of pocket, because the school district wasn't equipped to handle her needs. That was $36,000. I worked overtime constantly. I missed my other children's events. I missed my own life. Melissa is a corporate attorney in Denver. She makes $500,000 a year. She sent me a text message for my 75th birthday. The twins, Cameron and Natalie, were born when I was 34. They were premature by 4 weeks, weighed 5.5 pounds combined, and spent a month in the hospital. Richard and I took turns sleeping in chairs in the NICU. When they came home, they had reflux like Garrett, had colic, and for the first 6 months, they never slept at the same time. I was a ghost. I looked like a ghost. My hair fell out in clumps from the stress. A dermatologist told me I had stress-induced alopecia and that I should try to relax more. I was 34 years old with 4 children under the age of 6 and a mortgage and a husband who loved me but who was also drowning. When the twins were 5, Natalie was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis. Her hands would swell and she'd cry. We flew to Stanford to see a specialist. That cost $8,000 out of pocket. We got her into a treatment program that required monthly drives to Denver, which was 2 hours away. I drove her. I did that for 4 years. That was my Thursday afternoons. That was my marriage, or what was left of it. Cameron went to college at USC. My contribution was $120,000 out of a $180,000 total cost. Natalie went to the University of Chicago. I paid $110,000 of her $165,000 bill. Cameron is a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco, making well over $1 million a year in stock options. Natalie is a management consultant in New York, making $400,000 annually. Do you know what they sent me for Christmas last year? The twins sent me a Costco gift card for $75, split between them. That's $37.50 each from a daughter who makes $400,000 a year. I saved and sacrificed and lost pieces of myself for 4 people who became successful adults. And I don't regret it. That's not the point of this story. I don't regret it because that's what I chose to do. That's what mothers did in my generation. You don't keep score. You just give. But on that Tuesday, in my living room, with the Belgian chocolate still sitting unopened on the coffee table, they started keeping score. Garrett opened the folder first. "Mom, we've been talking," he said. And right there, I knew. We've been thinking about the future, your future, and ours. I said nothing. I lifted my coffee cup. It was my second cup that morning, and it had gone lukewarm, and I took a sip. "The house is worth $890,000, Melissa said. She was reading from her own folder now, a lawyer's precision. "The ranch in Paradise Valley is worth approximately $580,000. The car, the furniture, your accounts." She looked up. "We think it's best if we talk about how to divide these things." I still said nothing. Cameron spoke up. He was the entrepreneur, so he was more comfortable with the business part. "We're not trying to be morbid, Mom, but you're 76. You're alone. We should have a plan. And honestly, taxes are going to be brutal on the estate if we don't handle it properly." Natalie looked out the window. Garrett continued. "So we thought, the house I could take. Melissa can have the ranch. The car and the accounts we split between us." "Wait," Melissa said. "We should probably split the accounts 5 ways. Mom gets to keep some to live on." Split the accounts 5 ways, as if I had already died and become another heir. I set down my coffee cup. The sound of it hitting the saucer was very clear in my living room. "The ranch should probably go to Natalie and Cameron," Cameron said. "They're on the coasts. You two need assets. Land appreciates. That's better for your future. And I get the house, Garrett said. That works for me. It's worth the most, and I'm the oldest. What about the artwork? Natalie suddenly asked. She had found her voice. The Navajo pieces? The Friedman painting? Split those equally among us, Melissa said, but not her, not Mom. That was the moment I really understood what was happening. Not her, not Mom. I stood up slowly. I was careful about standing up in those days. My knees weren't what they used to be. I picked up the plate of Belgian chocolates and I walked out to the kitchen. I could hear them talking behind me, dividing, allocating, reorganizing my entire life into neat little piles with their names on them. I set the chocolates on the counter. I didn't eat any of them. I would throw them away the next morning. I came back into the living room. They all looked at me like I was about to say something important. I was. I looked at each of them for a long moment. I have a dentist appointment tomorrow at 9, I said, so I won't be able to do this today. Garrett, could you email me that folder? He said he would. I nodded. I sat back down and picked up my coffee cup, which was now completely cold, and I held it between my hands. They continued talking for another 40 minutes. They were energized now, excited. This was a fun problem to solve. They pulled up property value websites on their phones. They talked about depreciation and investment potential. Cameron mentioned something about capital gains tax strategy. Melissa said she might want to renovate the ranch before selling it. The house, Garrett said, he would probably keep in the family, but he might want to add a wine cellar. My wine cellar. He meant the basement where I had stored wine. I don't remember what I said when they left. I was polite. I kissed them each goodbye. Natalie lingered for a moment, and I thought she might say something, but she didn't. She just hugged me very tightly, like she was trying to apologize without using words. After they left, I sat in that quiet house, and I drank the rest of my cold coffee. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen, and I read through the folder Garrett had emailed over. Every asset, every account, every piece of property I had spent my entire adult life acquiring was listed on that spreadsheet with their names assigned to it. At 8:04 a.m., I called my lawyer. His name was Robert Hoffman. He'd been doing my legal work since 1998. He was 79 years old, and he sounded surprised to hear from me. Eleanor, he said, everything okay? I need to rewrite my will, I told him. I can come in today at 9. There was a pause. What happened? I'll tell you when I see you, I said. I hung up the phone, showered, got dressed in my best pants and my good blouse, the blue one with the lace collar that Richard always liked, and I drove to Robert's office on Main Street. It was 6 blocks from my house. I had walked that distance 1,000 times in my life. I had driven it maybe 5 times. The drive took 3 minutes. I remember my hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I had to grip it tighter to keep them still. I kept thinking about how easy it had been for them, for my children, to sit in my living room and carve up my life like it was a Thanksgiving turkey. How casual they'd been about it. How energized. I thought about Natalie's silence, and that almost hurt worse than the rest. I parked in the small lot behind Robert's building. The building was old, brick, one of the historic structures on Main Street that had survived the decades while everything else evolved. There was a photograph in Robert's waiting room of this same building from 1952. It looked exactly the same then. That steadiness felt important that morning. Robert was waiting for me when I got there. He knew me well enough to see that something had shifted. His office smelled like old paper and leather, the smell of decisions that had already been made, already been lived with. He didn't ask questions. He just got his legal pad and his pen and he said, "Tell me." I told him everything. I told him about the folder, about the spreadsheet, about the way Cameron had mentioned capital gains taxes while my life was being reorganized. I told him about Natalie's silence and what that silence meant. I told him about Melissa saying, "Not her, not Mom," and the exact feel of that phrase cutting through my chest. Robert listened without interrupting. His handwriting never faltered. At one point I looked down and saw he'd written the words, "already dead to them," in his precise cursive, and I realized he understood what this was really about. When I finished, he set down his pen and he looked at me over his reading glasses. "You understand this is irrevocable," he said. "Once you sign, there's no going back." "I understand," I said. "And you're certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He nodded slowly. "All right, let's talk about options." The original will I'd made in 1999, 25 years earlier, left everything equally to Garrett, Melissa, Cameron, and Natalie. It was simple. It was fair. It was the will of a mother who still believed her children might surprise her someday. But that woman didn't exist anymore. What we created that morning instead was something entirely different. The house on Bridger Meadow Lane, the house where all four of them had learned to walk, had said their first words, had grown up. I left to the Bozeman Habitat for Humanity chapter. The organization would be allowed to rent it out to a low-income family for the next 20 years, and after that, they could sell it and use the proceeds for affordable housing. Robert said that would likely create a modest tax deduction and would absolutely avoid probate issues with the property. The ranch in Paradise Valley I left to the Montana Nature Conservancy. It would be maintained as protected land, never developed, held in perpetuity for conservation. I was giving back 380 acres of beautiful land to the place that had given me everything. The car, a 2019 Subaru Outback that I'd bought used, went to the Missoula Food Bank. They could use it for deliveries. But the accounts, the liquid assets, that's where I made my real statement. I had approximately $740,000 in various savings and retirement accounts. The largest account was a CD ladder I'd built over 15 years of conservative investing, saving money I didn't have, money I'd earned from overtime and side work and small sacrifices I'd made every single day. Of that $740,000, I created a scholarship fund, Eleanor and Richard Price Family Scholarship, to be awarded annually to students from low-income backgrounds pursuing degrees in nursing, teaching, or social work. Fields that serve people, fields that don't make you rich, but they change the world. The fund would provide 25 scholarships a year at $15,000 each. That's $375,000 annually until the principal was depleted. But Robert had structured it so that the principal would generate enough interest to sustain itself indefinitely. By giving, I wasn't depleting my legacy, I was multiplying it. The remaining $365,000 I divided into smaller bequests. The Bozeman Public Library got $50,000 to expand their accessibility programs. The Women's Shelter in Missoula got $75,000. St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital got $100,000 in honor of Natalie's childhood struggles. The Regional Hospice Organization got $100,000 because I knew my time was finite and I wanted good care for people like me. The Montana Youth Leadership Foundation got $40,000. And then there was the personal part. I had a set of emerald earrings my mother had left me. I don't know what they're worth, maybe $2,000, maybe more. I left those to the Bozeman Community Foundation with instructions that they be auctioned off annually to raise money for mental health services. Because Melissa had suffered, and I had suffered watching her suffer, and I wanted something to come from that. My collection of first edition books, worth probably $30,000 combined, went to the Bozeman Public Library's rare book collection. My jewelry, everything except the emeralds, was left to a local women's shelter with instructions that they could sell it and use the proceeds, or the women there could wear it. Broken, beautiful things finding their way to people who understood how that felt. Robert was typing as I spoke, creating the new language of my will. Legalese. Whereas and therefores and herein's. But underneath the formal language was something else. Clarity. "What about letters?" Robert asked. "Do you want to leave letters?" I hadn't thought about it, but yes, I did. We spent another hour on the letters, 4 of them, 1 for each child. I didn't need Robert's help with these. He stepped out of his office and I sat at his desk with a pen and beautiful heavy paper, and I wrote. The letter to Garrett was first. "You spent 6 years in my home learning to speak clearly, learning to be heard. I drove to Denver every Thursday for 4 years to make sure Natalie's voice could be heard, that her body would work for her the way you wanted yours to work. I paid for that because I loved you, not because I expected anything in return. But I also didn't expect you to divide my voice, my home, my legacy without asking what I wanted to say. You chose to see me as already gone. I've decided to really disappear, but not in the way you planned. I'm still here, but I'm not your mother anymore. I'm someone else now. Someone still capable of choosing. I didn't sign it, Love, Mom. I signed it, Eleanor. For Melissa, I wrote about the afternoon I couldn't lift my head from my pillow because the depression was so heavy, and how her small hand had touched my face and said, "Mommy, wake up." How that moment had saved my life. How I had spent 30 years paying back that debt by giving her everything I had. How I'd become an expert in anxiety, not her anxiety, but the anxiety of becoming nothing in someone else's life. And how I'd finally decided to become something again. For Cameron, I wrote about the investment he'd become, the return on investment he expected to see from his mother, calculated in property values and tax deductions. I told him that the best investment he could make now was in his own conscience, which I suspected he'd left behind somewhere in his hunger to accumulate. For Natalie, I wrote differently. She was the one who'd hugged me, who'd lingered. "I know you didn't want to be here that day," I wrote. "I know you're better than your silence that afternoon. I'm going to give you a gift now that your siblings don't get. A chance to know your mother. When you're ready, call me. I'll be waiting. But I'm not waiting the way I used to, on the edge of my seat, hoping you'd love me. I'm waiting with my own life, fully lived, beside me. Join us if you want." I folded the letters carefully and placed them in envelopes. I would give them to Robert to include with the will, to be delivered only after my death or upon request, whichever came first. I wanted them to have time to wonder before they had the answers. Robert printed everything out. 37 pages of legal documents. He had his assistant, a young woman named Shanice, come in as a witness. She had no idea what she was witnessing, the dismantling of one woman's life as her children expected it, and the construction of something entirely new. Before I signed, Robert did something I'll never forget. He set down the stack of papers and he looked at me very carefully. "Eleanor," he said, "I've known you for 26 years. I know this is real. I know you mean every word of this. But I need to ask you one more time. Are you signing this because you're angry, or are you signing this because it's true?" I sat with that question for a long moment, and the answer was so clear it almost surprised me. "Both," I said. "I'm angry. I don't think I've ever been genuinely angry in my whole life, and yes, I'm angry now. But that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I spent 76 years believing that my life was supposed to be a footnote to theirs. I'm doing this because I want to know before I die what it feels like to make a choice for myself. I'm signing this because it's true." Robert nodded slowly. He straightened the papers and he said, "Okay then, let's make it official." I signed every page. My signature was steady. With each signature, I could feel something shifting inside of me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. Each page I signed was a promise to myself that I wasn't going to apologize for existing anymore. When I finished, Shanice witnessed my signature, Robert witnessed hers, and then it was done. He set down his pen, and he reached across the desk and took my hand. "You're going to be fine," he said. "Better than fine. You're going to be free." It took about 2 hours total from the moment I'd called Robert at 8:04 a.m. to the moment I walked out of his office at 11:15 with a copy of the new will in my hands. But it felt like I'd been reborn in those 2 hours. The winter sun was bright that day. I remember being surprised by that. I thought it should be raining, or at least cloudy. But it was clear and sharp and cold. I drove home slowly. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I had all the time in the world. When I got back to the house, I made myself a real lunch, not a sandwich. I made a frittata with vegetables and cheese. I opened a bottle of wine, a decent Pinot from a local vintner, and I drank half of it sitting on my back porch, looking out at the mountains. The mountains were the same mountains they'd always been. The view hadn't changed, but I had. I thought about all the nights I'd spent in this house, awake with a sick baby, alone after Richard died, waiting for children who didn't call, driving in the dark to be where someone needed me. All of that had happened. All of that was real, but it didn't own me anymore. For the first time in decades, I felt light. That night, I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I ate dinner alone. I watched a show I actually wanted to watch instead of whatever everyone else was interested in. I went to bed at 9 o'clock and I slept beautifully for 8 hours straight. The next morning I woke up, and the only question I asked myself was not, "What do my children need?" but, "What do I want to do today?" The answer was something I hadn't done in probably 30 years. I wanted to paint. I went up to the attic and I found my old easel. It was dusty, covered in a plastic bag, stored next to boxes of Christmas decorations I hadn't touched in years. The legs were still solid. The canvas holder still worked. It was like finding an old friend who'd been waiting for you to remember them. I found the boxes of acrylics I'd bought in 1989 when Melissa was born, and I'd thought maybe I could have both, a creative life and a mother's life. I'd chosen motherhood, of course. That was never really a choice. But now I chose this too. Some of the paints had dried out. Some of the brushes had gotten stiff. I had to throw away maybe half of what I found. But enough remained. Enough to begin again. I set up the easel in the sunroom, the room where Richard and I used to have our morning coffee together before the children woke up, back when we were still just two people in love. I found a canvas I'd stretched myself decades ago, the fabric still good, still waiting. I squeezed out colors I barely remembered the names of: cadmium red, cerulean blue, titanium white. My hands remembered, even if my mind didn't. And I painted. What I painted doesn't matter. It wasn't good. It was rusty and awkward. My perspective was off. My proportions were terrible. But it was honest. It was what I actually saw when I looked at the mountains outside the window, not what I thought I should see. And it was the most joyful thing I'd done in years. For 3 hours I forgot about Garrett and Melissa and Cameron and Natalie. I forgot about the house and the ranch and the accounts. I was just a woman with paint on her hands and colors in front of her, deciding what the world should look like. I painted for 3 weeks before Natalie called me, just out of the blue on a Saturday morning. She said, "Hi, Mom. I was wondering if maybe we could get coffee sometime." I was in the middle of my second canvas. This one was actually starting to look like something, a landscape of Paradise Valley that I remembered from my heart rather than from photographs. I set down my brush and I looked at the phone like it might explode. "Yes," I said, "I'd like that." We met at a coffee shop on Main Street called the Black Bear Brew House. Natalie was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cappuccino and a worried expression. She stood up to hug me, and I could feel her trembling. "I've been trying to figure out what to say," she said as soon as we sat down. "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "I know, but I do. I was horrible that day. We all were, but I knew better. I could feel that it was wrong, and I just sat there." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. "You hugged me when you left." "I did?" "You did. It was the only honest thing that happened that whole afternoon." Natalie cried a little. It was quiet crying, the kind she used to do as a child when she thought no one could hear her. "Mom, Garrett called an emergency family meeting yesterday. They're all freaking out because apparently the new will is going to be executed or whatever, and it's—" She stopped because I held up my hand. "I don't want to hear about it," I said. "Not from you. You weren't part of whatever came after that day." "But don't you want to talk about—" "No," I said, very gently but very firmly. "What I want is to know how you've been. Tell me about your life. Tell me something real." And she did. She told me about a project at work that was challenging her. She told me about a relationship she was considering ending because the man didn't make her feel brave. She told me about taking up hiking, about spending weekends on trails, trying to figure out who she wanted to be when she stopped being the person her family expected. I told her about the painting. I described the canvases without any apology for their imperfection. I told her that I was thinking of taking a class, maybe at the community college. I told her that I'd been volunteering at the library, helping with their literacy program, teaching people how to read. I told her that the work felt like the most important thing I'd ever done, which made me realize that raising 4 children successfully meant I had actually already done the most important thing. Everything after that was mine. Natalie reached across the table and took my hand. "I wish I'd understood that when I was younger. I wish I'd known that you were human." "I didn't know either," I said. "I thought being a mother meant being a servant. I thought love meant disappearing. It took me a long time to understand that you can love people and still be visible." We talked for almost 2 hours. It wasn't a healing conversation. It was too early for that. But it was honest. When we left the coffee shop, she hugged me again, and this time it felt like a real goodbye. Not final, but complete. Like we were both acknowledging that something had ended, and we could be something new now. I didn't hear from Garrett, Melissa, or Cameron for 5 months. In those 5 months, I painted, I volunteered. I took a water aerobics class at the community center and made friends with women my age who were living the second half of their lives with intention. The water aerobics class met on Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 9 a.m. There were about 15 of us, and we were all doing gentle exercises in a warm pool, which sounds simple but felt revolutionary. One of the women, named Ruth, was 78 and had raised 7 children. Another woman named Carol was a former school principal. There was Margaret, who had been a concert pianist before arthritis had made it impossible. We didn't talk about our children in that pool. We talked about our dreams. We talked about the things we'd given up and whether we regretted it. And we laughed. God, we laughed so much. After about a month of water aerobics, Ruth said, "We should start a dinner club. We should have a night where we actually get together and talk like people instead of like mothers." So I started a monthly dinner club with them. We rotated houses, everyone brought a dish, and we told the stories we'd been too busy to tell when we were raising families. Ruth told us about the career she'd almost had in architecture before she met her husband and chose a different path. Carol talked about the marriage that had ended because she'd finally decided she was tired of being small in her own life. Margaret played piano for us one night, a Chopin nocturne, and I watched her face while she played, the pure joy of it, the way her body remembered something her hands had thought they'd lost. That night, I understood that it was never too late to become yourself again. I donated $5,000 to a legal aid clinic and specifically requested that they use it to help women in the middle of divorces find housing. I funded a scholarship for a young woman named Priya who wanted to be a nurse. She had been homeless her entire sophomore year of college and had somehow still maintained a 3.8 GPA. I wrote her a letter telling her that I'd once been desperate too, and that her determination reminded me that some people were worth believing in. I heard from Robert in August. He said that the scholarship fund had officially been established, that the paperwork had been processed, and that we were ready to give out the first 25 scholarships in the fall. He asked if I wanted to be present for the award ceremony. I did. I went, and I watched 25 young people receive 5-year scholarships to study nursing, teaching, and social work. One of them was Priya. She cried when she got it. She said, "I don't know who the Eleanor and Richard Price Fund is, but whoever you are, you changed my life." I sat in the back of the auditorium and I cried too, but they were different tears than I'd cried in all those years before. These were tears of something being made right, not tears of something being taken away. In September, the house sold to Habitat for Humanity. They didn't tear it down or renovate it into something unrecognizable. They found a family, a single mother with 3 kids, all under 10. She was an LPN at the hospital, working 60-hour weeks to keep her family stable. They moved in within a month. I drove by once, right after they moved in, and I saw toys in the front yard. I saw the tricycle I remembered buying for Cameron when he was 2, being ridden by a child I'd never meet. I felt like I could breathe for the first time. It was October when the lawyer's letter came. Not from Robert, but from another lawyer, representing Melissa. The letter said that my children were challenging the will. They were claiming undue influence, cognitive decline, and elder abuse. They wanted the will invalidated and my estate divided according to the original 1999 document. I read the letter sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I'd made myself, coffee I didn't have to share with anyone. Coffee I could drink exactly the way I liked it. And I laughed. I actually laughed, Not the bitter laugh of someone who'd been betrayed, but the genuine laugh of someone who'd finally seen the whole picture and realized how small the frame actually was. I called Robert. "They're suing," I said. "I know, I got the same letter." "Can they win?" "No," he said. "Eleanor, you were lucid, you were intentional, you were completely aware of what you were doing, and you explained your reasoning to me in detail. You have a legal right to dispose of your property as you see fit. There's no cognitive decline, there's no undue influence, there's just a mother who changed her mind." "How long will this take?" "Could be years. They're going to be persistent." "Will it cost me a lot of money?" "Some, but the will sets aside $100,000 for legal defense. You'll be fine." "And Eleanor?" "They're going to lose. Just so you know that. They're going to spend 6 figures losing." After I hung up the phone, I thought about the money they would spend, the energy they would burn, the time they would invest in trying to get back what they'd never earned in the first place. And I realized that their lawsuit was the best possible outcome, because it meant I never had to wonder what they might have done with kindness. It meant I never had to test whether they could be people of integrity. The question had answered itself. The lawsuit became public information. Local news outlets picked it up. Local woman's contested will splits family over charitable giving. A small story in the Bozeman Chronicle, the kind of thing that people read over morning coffee and forgot by lunch. Except people didn't forget. I started getting letters, long letters, handwritten letters, from people who read the story and recognized something in it. A woman in California who had spent 30 years supporting her son and watched him grow to resent her. A woman in Wyoming who said she finally had permission to stop sacrificing. A woman in Idaho who said, "Thank you, I just filed for divorce because of your story, and I'm going to be okay." People I'd never meet, people who would never know me, were having their own reckoning with what they owed and what they owed themselves. Natalie called me once a month after that. Sometimes we talked about real things. Sometimes she asked me how the lawsuit was going, and I told her the truth. I no longer cared. The outcome wouldn't change anything. I'd already won. One afternoon in November, Natalie came to the house. Not to divide anything or plan anything, but just to visit. She asked if she could see the paintings. I took her to the sunroom and I showed her the 5 canvases I'd completed. They weren't masterpieces, but they were evidence. Evidence that I had been here, that I had wanted things, that I had created. Natalie looked at them for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know you could do this." "Neither did I said. That's the thing about disappearing into someone else's life. You forget what you're capable of. "Do you hate us?" she asked suddenly. I looked at her, at the worried shape of her face, at the way she was standing like she was ready to be hit, ready to absorb anger. And I realized the truth. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. I don't love you any less. But I love myself more now, and I should have started doing that when I was 25. I should have done it when I was 35. If I'd done that, maybe you would have learned it too. But I can't go back and change that. I can only live better going forward." "Will you let me help you with the garden next spring?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." The lawsuit took 2 years and went exactly as Robert predicted. The judge ruled in my favor. My children appealed. They lost again. By 2026, it was finally settled, and the courts affirmed that Eleanor Catherine Price had the right to dispose of her estate as she saw fit. By then, I barely cared. The scholarship fund was already operating. The land was protected. The house had been a home to 2 different families now, each one finding safety and stability in its walls. I'd seen it all happen without waiting for a legal verdict. I turned 81 years old on March 14th, 2026. I had coffee with Natalie in the morning. I taught my literacy class in the afternoon. I went to dinner with my friends from the water aerobics group, and in the evening I sat in the sunroom and I painted. The canvas I was working on was the mountains again, but this time I was painting them the way I saw them through my own eyes instead of through everyone else's needs. They were still beautiful. In fact, they'd never been more beautiful. I think about Richard sometimes. I wonder what he would have done. Richard was a gentleman, and he would never have treated me the way our children did. But Richard also would have understood why I couldn't keep giving the way I'd been giving. He would have held my hand through this reckoning. I think about the woman I was, the woman who drove to Denver every Thursday, who slept 4 hours a night, who poured everything into 4 people who would one day divide her without asking. I don't hate that woman. I was doing the best I knew how. But I'm not her anymore. What I am now is someone who volunteers at the library and teaches people how to read at 60 years old. I'm someone who paints, who has friends who call just to see how I am, who says no to requests and means it. I'm someone who gave $2 million away and felt richer afterward. The scholarship fund has now given $425,000 to students pursuing caring professions. Priya became a registered nurse and works at a community health center in the Delta. She sends me a Christmas card every year with a picture of herself at work, helping people. The letter always says the same thing. Thank you for believing I was worth something. I believe that about myself now, too. I no longer hear from Garrett, Melissa, or Cameron, except occasionally in the context of the lawsuit that is now finally closed. I don't expect to. We made a choice together in that living room on Valentine's Day 2024, and they chose to divide me. I chose to invest in people who were worthy of the gift. Some people ask me if I regret having children. The answer is no. I regret the shape of love I learned, which was the love of erasure. But the children themselves, I'm grateful they existed. They taught me that being a mother was important, but being a person was important too. That took me 76 years to learn, but at least I learned it. I'm still here on Bridger Meadow Lane, though I rent the house now from Habitat for Humanity. It's funny being a tenant in the place I built, but I like knowing that my home is now shelter for someone who needs it more than I need to own it. Some mornings I wake up and I forget for a moment that I'm not supposed to be useful to someone else anymore. Some mornings the guilt tries to return, but then I remember, I gave everything. The answer was always going to be, it wasn't enough. So I stopped trying to make it enough. I started making my own life enough. That's the thing they don't tell you about motherhood, or about devotion, or about sacrifice. Eventually, you have to stop. And when you stop, when you finally choose yourself, people will call you selfish. Let them. I'm 81 years old. I'm a painter. I'm a volunteer literacy instructor. I'm a friend. I'm a woman with my own life, and I'm finally, deeply, completely okay with that.